Thanks to the folks at Pioner, I was given an opportunity to take a very early look at an alpha demo of the first-person shooter action RPG that is supposed to contain elements of both PvP and PvE when it reaches its full launch. The studio GFA Games, located in the southeastern European country of Serbia, has been working diligently for a few years now on the upcoming title intended for release to Xbox, PS5, and Steam simultaneously, and provided me with a beta branch key of a single-player demo of their game that encompasses about 3 hours for their main story's completion and another 10 or so hours worth of side quests. Pioneer has some breathtaking views and some pretty flashy visual effects, but unfortunately, I don't feel like Pioneer is pioneering much of anything at the moment. I want to be clear that I was not paid to write this review, and I was not offered any form of compensation or given any guidelines on what I could or couldn't say, or how I could or couldn't say them, which I very much appreciate from the dev team. So, thank you very much for that, guys. Also, in an attempt not to spoil anything that might end up as a final version of the game's story, I'm going to refrain from spoiling very much here, so I'm going to keep the footage to an early section of even this demo. Also, please remember that this is a very early alpha of the game, which means it's not indicative of a final product, and I'm going to do my level best to keep my review in that context, and I hope you guys will as well. Pioneer's story is kind of shrouded in mystery. It's one in which you awaken with little to no memory of who you are, how you got to where you are, or why you're even there. There are basic tropes for your background that have things to do with what your prior military background was, if any, or various other odds and ends regarding your combat experience. Upon meeting a large man in purple silk, brandishing a wide smile and a gold tooth, you're set off on a mission to find a missing caravan of goods through which you come across a rift, where a voice from the beyond speaks to you and tell you that it really wants you to die, leaving you to scramble for your life while UV purple-laced bulldogs try to chase you down, ultimately leading you to the main hub of the game, some traders, some quest givers, and the like. Pioneer comes across as this really strange mishmash of games and mechanics. There's a dash of Borderlands and other predecessors of survival-type and apocalypse-style gun games sprinkled in here with obvious inspiration from games like Stalker, Metro, and feels very inspired by the game Atomic Heart. The survival aspect of the game isn't really apparent nor pressuring, aside from the food and drink that you can loot in different places, providing the player with various different buffs or debuffs depending on what you consume and how long it lasts. Environmentally, the game is stunning. Right off of the rip, there was this wild-looking space whale flying around in the background. The landscape looked distorted and overrun with some kind of corruption. There were these NPC enemies that would appear from time to time and try to run you down, which is where I started noticing some of the flaws and issues. Firstly, although there were a lot of UI options, there wasn't any kind of adjustment for the head bobbing or camera shake throughout the demo. For a lot of people, myself included somewhat, I've noticed that excessive head bob and camera shaking leads to some pretty rough motion sickness at times. Some amount of camera shake or head shaking is understandable for dramatic effect, but to me, Pioneer's choice with some of this felt excessive. Also, while there were graphic adjustments for things like anti-aliasing using things like DLAA, I believe this game was utilizing DLSS always without the ability to turn it off. If it wasn't always on, then there is some pretty rather intense levels of artifacting going on with certain meshes that definitely need to be addressed, especially in the pre-animated cutscenes. Even though they're rendered, you could see some of these trails being left behind in certain places, and again, this was excessive. The soundscape of the game was okay, but there were many areas of flawed sound effects where either the sound effect was muffled or it just didn't have the right effect applied to it. Also, I noticed that directionally, the audio felt a bit off at times. You could hear a dog bark at you from time to time in a correct direction, but I couldn't hear whether or not it was running on the ground behind me, because there just weren't any footstep sounds. Animation-wise, the humans turned rift zombies that would run you down did so with the same running style as one of the giants in Attack on Titan, hands at their sides with this awkwardly fast shuffle that never really engaged their upper body. I'd find myself taking hits from them, but those hits never rendered or looked like they were landing. Also, the hand and gun animations in first person felt a little disjointed at times or overly dramatic. The weapon slashing animations from this rusted machete you got at the very beginning also had a very frustrated delay between melee swings, as if the swing itself had a rate limit or a hidden cooldown that just allowed me to take hits from the mobs as they attacked me, which did not feel good or fun. For combat, there was also this push that made ammo for ranged weapons feel pretty scarce. It felt that there was an intention to use them sparingly, like only as a last resort, at least at first, so you were left to try to defend yourself with this rusty machete, which is absolutely fine from a design perspective. I've played plenty of games like Dying Light where you have an extreme level of reliance on melee weapons rather than using guns, but in Dying Light there were parrying mechanics and counters, there are dodges that you could implement in order to make combat feel more fun and engaging. Pioner unfortunately just had this left click to attack. There wasn't even a blocking option for the character, much less a dodge or parrying ability. I found myself just hit trading an awful lot of the time on the things that I was fighting rather than trying to play around them and avoid the hits that were coming. Partially because the attack swings weren't animated, and also partially because the controls to do so didn't exist. Death in the game was also extremely, if not the most frustrating aspect of the game so far. If you die in this version, it's not that big of a deal. You go back to a checkpoint. But if there is a certain pre-event cutscene where you have to wait through a scripted event, a lot of those were unskippable. Some of them took several minutes in order to redo an encounter. Remember, a lot of gamers are fickle, and little things like that for people that don't have the time to bother wading through some of the things they've already seen when they're trying to grind a gauntlet or a boss encounter is just not going to sit well. Story-wise and voice acting-wise, unfortunately, this game also seems to be following similar formulae to a dozen other games we've seen come and go in the last 10 years or so. Anomalous thing happens in Europe that brings about an apocalyptic event, and you are now set to unravel the mystery of what happened, work to try to do something about it, and just exist in this odd area of the globe. The voice acting felt in a lot of cases like there were local or more localized voice actors attempting to do various different accents as opposed to just hiring people that were localized already to the language that they had intended to use.
Damn it! I'm still freaked out! My hands are still shaking!
You old bastard, are you insane? Who's gonna shoot now? Give me the gun.
It almost felt like the guys in the studio said, well, we can't have everyone sounding like they came from a region of the globe that used to be the USSR. Hey, Yuri, what other accents can you do? Now, I know that sounds a little harsh and maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it wasn't like Inglourious Basterds Brad Pitt trying to say he could speak fluent German bad, but it was noticeable at times. The core gameplay loop is or feels like it's kind of simplistic in nature as well. A lot of the early game stuff especially would have little side paths that you could explore to find rundown houses or smaller points of interest, but 9 out of 10 times, those points of interest were merely aesthetic scenery. Only one of those points of interest so far that I came across had an enemy that popped out when you got there, and no loot to be found, by the way, and only one other location had a single item to interact with and no enemies to fight. Mechanically, the gunplay in the game also felt a little weird too. Even in the tutorial section when you're handed a PM pistol for the first time, the enemies you fight take multiple hits in order to down them, and the accuracy of the gun itself felt off, as if there was some kind of rough cone of accuracy mechanic forcing your bullets not to hit where you're aiming. Kind of similar to how Tarkov's MOA cone of accuracy mechanic when you fired at enemies from long range. The important exception here though is these enemies were 10 feet away, not 200 meters. Now remember, this is an alpha game, so naturally there's going to be bugs or things that people are going to look at and feel are a little rough. And I know that Pioner, even as early as just a few hours ago, posted a tweet saying that they had taken some of this feedback already and have already made adjustments and are working on further ones. And I'm sure that a lot of these things will be addressed, refined, and tweaked, and I'm excited to see what they ultimately build this game into. With that being said, I don't think the world needs or wants another Atomic Heart. Awkward voice lines when you reload and stuff aren't really necessary, and I'm still looking for the thing in this game that screams I'm unique. Obviously, I haven't been able to experience any of the multiplayer features that the game has to offer due to it being a single-player demo, and I very much appreciate GFA Games for allowing me to review it in this early of a stage. But I'm definitely going to need more from the studio in their next stage of development before I'll feel like this is a game that I'm hyped for.